The world changed this morning, not metaphorically, not as a headline, literally. At approximately 2:30 a.m. Washington time on February 28, 2026, the United States military began what President Donald Trump called, in his own words, major combat operations in Iran. Let that sit for a second. The United States is at war with Iran. Israel struck first, then the US confirmed it was joining. Explosions rang out across Tehran. Smoke rose over the presidential district. Missiles hit the neighborhood where Iran's supreme leader normally sleeps. And now, this morning, two of the most significant names in the Iranian military chain of command are reportedly dead. Major General Amir Hatami, Commander-in-Chief of the Iranian Army, and Abdolrahim Mousavi, Chief of Staff of Iran's armed forces, both reportedly eliminated in the opening strikes, according to Israeli sources and multiple media reports. Iran has not confirmed this, but if true, and the evidence is mounting, the Iranian military has been decapitated at the very moment it is trying to fight back. Four Gulf countries, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, are now under Iranian missile and drone attack in retaliation. A U.S. Navy base in Bahrain has been hit. Internet across Iran has collapsed to 4% of normal levels, and airspace across the entire Middle East is closed. This is not a drill. This is not a limited skirmish. This is the opening hours of what could become the most consequential military conflict since the Iraq War, and possibly since World War II. In this video, we're going to break down everything: how it started this morning, what Iran is doing right now in response, and what this means for the rest of the world, your gas prices, your economy, your security, and the global balance of power. Let's go. At some point in the early hours of Saturday, February 28th, Israeli jets and U.S. warplanes simultaneously attacked multiple targets across Iran. The operation has two names. On the Israeli side, Operation Shield of Judah. On the American side, officially designated by the U.S. Department of War, which is what the Pentagon has been renamed, Operation Epic Fury. The Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, was the first to go public. He called it a preemptive strike to remove threats to the state of Israel. Minutes later, Donald Trump appeared in a video posted to Truth Social at 2:30 a.m. Washington time and confirmed that the United States had launched what he described as a massive and ongoing operation. His words: "Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime." He then told Iranian troops to lay down your weapons and offered them immunity if they did. He told the Iranian people, "The hour of your freedom is at hand. When we have finished, take over your government." And he warned American families, "The lives of courageous American heroes may be lost. That often happens in war." He was not speaking hypothetically. So what did they actually hit? The targets confirmed so far include multiple sites in central Tehran, specifically the Pasteur district, which is where Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei normally lives and where the presidential palace and National Security Council are located. 7 missiles confirmed to have hit that area alone. Iranian sources say Khamenei was moved to a secure location before the strikes began. Beyond Tehran, explosions have been confirmed in Isfahan, home to one of Iran's most important nuclear complexes, in Qom, in Karaj, in Kermanshah. Across western Iran, the Israeli Air Force simultaneously announced it was conducting what it called an extensive wave of airstrikes against Iranian military targets. U.S. officials, speaking anonymously to multiple outlets, described the scale of the operation as not a small strike. They confirmed it involves attack planes from regional air bases and at least one aircraft carrier, possibly both the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford, which had both been deployed to the region in recent weeks. An NBC News producer on the ground in Tehran described the constant sound of explosions throughout the city. Communications in parts of Tehran have been cut. Mobile networks are down in some districts. Iran's internet connectivity dropped to 4% of normal levels within hours of the start of the strikes, according to monitoring organization NetBlocks, consistent with measures Iran used during the 12-day war with Israel in June 2025. Israel simultaneously declared a state of emergency across the entire country. A 48-hour emergency was announced, schools ordered closed, the public told to work from home, hospitals moved underground into shelters. All civilian airspace over Israel closed. Air raid sirens sounded across Tel Aviv and across the country as Iran began retaliating with ballistic missiles. Netanyahu spoke in a video message alongside Trump's announcement. He called the operation an effort to remove the existential threat posed by the terrorist regime in Iran. He said the operation would last as long as needed, and he told the Iranian people, echoing Trump, that the joint operation would create the conditions for the brave Iranian people to take their destiny into their own hands. Critics were quick to point out the political timing for Netanyahu. Israeli elections are scheduled for October 2026, and as CNN noted, security crises in Israel historically produce a rally around the flag effect. Netanyahu has been framing this moment as Israel's response to the October 7th Hamas attacks, finally, in his telling, targeting the root of the problem, Iran. Whether that framing holds depends entirely on what happens next. And what happens next is already underway. Iran was not caught off guard. Tehran had warned, repeatedly, explicitly, and in detail, that any attack would be met with devastating retaliation against both Israeli and American targets. And within hours of the first strikes, Iran made good on that promise. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, issued a statement confirming it had launched what it called the first broad wave of missile and drone attacks against Israel. Ballistic missiles were fired toward Israeli territory. Air raid sirens went off simultaneously across Israel. The Iron Dome and Arrow missile defense systems activated. Some missiles were intercepted, some were not. Simultaneously, Iran targeted U.S. military bases across the Gulf region. Here is the confirmed list of countries where Iranian strikes or attempted strikes have been reported as of this morning. Bahrain, home to the headquarters of the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet. The base was struck in a missile attack. Bahrain confirmed the hit. Qatar, the Al Udeid Air Base, one of the largest U.S. military installations in the Middle East, hosting tens of thousands of American military personnel, has been targeted. U.S. Embassy Qatar told all staff to shelter in place. Kuwait, Camp Arifjan, headquarters of U.S. Army Central, has reported explosions. Witnesses heard sirens and blasts. UAE, Abu Dhabi has reported explosions. The Al Dhafra Air Base, which hosts U.S. Air Force assets, is reportedly among the targets. Saudi Arabia, AFP reporters in Riyadh heard loud explosions. This is not Iran firing a few warning shots. This is Iran simultaneously targeting every American military footprint in the Gulf region. At the same time, the IRGC specifically named 4 bases in its official statement: Al Udeid in Qatar, Al Salem in Kuwait, Al Dhafra in the UAE, and the Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. The former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev reacted swiftly on social media, saying the United States had shown its true face. Russia and China have not yet officially condemned the strikes. Their silence, and what it means for the diplomatic fallout, is something we will get to. Iran's Supreme National Security Council released a statement saying the armed forces would give a crushing response. As of this morning, Israeli Channel 12, citing unnamed Israeli sources, reported that Israel assesses it has achieved very high success in its initial strikes, including against senior commanders. The report used notably careful language, stating it is not clear that Khamenei did not undergo a dramatic event. That sentence is doing a lot of work. CNN confirmed that among the specific targets of the opening strikes were Supreme Leader Khamenei, Armed Forces Chief of Staff Abdul Rahim Mousavi, and President Masoud Pezeshkian, according to two Israeli sources familiar with the operation. Also targeted, Ali Shamkhani, Secretary of Iran's newly established Defense Council, and Ali Larijani, Secretary of Iran's National Security Council. Multiple reports additionally indicate that Major General Amir Hatami, Commander-in-Chief of the Iranian Army, was killed in the strikes. Iran has not confirmed any of these deaths, but the pattern is clear. This was not just a strike on infrastructure. This was a systematic attempt to eliminate the entire Iranian military and political leadership in a single operation. If even half of those targets were successfully eliminated, Iran's ability to coordinate a unified military response has been severely compromised, even as its missiles are already in the air. To understand what happened today, you need the context, because this did not come out of nowhere. Let's rewind. June 2025. Israel launched what became known as Operation Rising Lion, a 12-day war against Iran. Israeli jets struck Iran's missile stockpiles, its command infrastructure, and nuclear-adjacent facilities. The United States joined, striking 3 nuclear sites, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, using B-2 stealth bombers and Tomahawk cruise missiles. Iran retaliated against the Al Udeid base in Qatar, but they gave the Americans advance warning. Damage was limited, a ceasefire was brokered, the 12-day war ended, but the underlying conflict did not. December 2025, nationwide protests erupted across Iran, triggered by economic collapse, the crash of the Iranian rial, and skyrocketing prices, but quickly evolving into calls for regime change. The largest anti-government movement in Iran since the 1979 revolution, spreading to over 100 cities. The regime responded with violent repression. During a press briefing on February 27, 2026, just one day before today's strikes, Trump stated that the Islamic Republic had killed at least 32,000 protesters. That figure tracks with estimates from senior Iranian health ministry officials who had leaked similar numbers. Meanwhile, the United States had been quietly assembling one of the largest military buildups in the Middle East since the 2003 Iraq invasion, the USS Abraham Lincoln, then the USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest aircraft carrier in the world, sent to join it. Additional F-18s, F-35s, drones, and strengthened missile defense systems deployed across the region. February 6th. Indirect nuclear negotiations between the U.S. and Iran began in Muscat, Oman. February 13th. Trump publicly stated that regime change in Iran would be the best thing that could happen. February 14th. U.S. officials told Reuters the military was preparing for weeks-long sustained operations against Iran, not a limited strike, but a broad campaign. February 17th. Iran responded by conducting live-fire military exercises in the Strait of Hormuz, effectively using the world's most critical oil choke point as a bargaining chip and a warning. February 27th, yesterday. A third round of nuclear talks took place in Geneva. The Omani foreign minister said Iran had accepted not to stockpile enriched uranium. That sounded like progress, but Trump publicly expressed dissatisfaction with the negotiations. And then, in the early hours of this morning, the bombs started falling. The diplomatic window closed, the military window opened, and here we are. Here is the question that every government, every central bank, every oil trader, and every supply chain executive on the planet is asking right now. Will Iran close the Strait of Hormuz? If you don't know what that means, let us explain, because it might be the most economically important question in the world right now. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway, roughly 33 kilometers wide at its tightest point, located between Iran and Oman. It connects the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea, and through it flows approximately 20 million barrels of oil per day. That is roughly 20% of the entire world's daily oil consumption. It is also the transit route for 22% of global liquefied natural gas, LNG, exports, primarily from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, Iraq. Most of the world's major oil exporters ship their product through this choke point. There is no viable alternative route that can handle even a fraction of those volumes. Iran controls the northern side of that strait. Iran's parliament has already approved a motion to close the Strait of Hormuz. The final decision rests with Iran's National Security Council. Analysts at Lombard Odier Bank warned before today's strikes that a temporary closure could spike oil prices to $100 a barrel or beyond. Oxford Economics previously modeled a strait closure as their worst-case scenario, projecting Brent crude potentially reaching $130 per barrel and U.S. inflation climbing to 6%. That would be catastrophic for the global economy. Oil markets are already bracing. As of this morning, analysts confirmed that the Strait of Hormuz is now effectively a war zone, and that a sharp war premium is expected to be priced into crude when markets open on Monday. Now, here is the complicating factor. Iran has threatened to close the strait many times over decades. It has never actually done so, for several reasons. Iran itself exports oil through the strait. Closing it would antagonize China, Iran's primary oil buyer and one of its few remaining international partners. It would violate Oman's territorial waters, and it would push Gulf states firmly into the American camp. But those calculations were made before today, before U.S. bombs fell on Tehran, before Iran's military leadership may have been decapitated, before the regime was fighting for its survival. And here is the new variable that changes everything. If the Iranian chief of staff and army commander are dead, if the chain of command has been severed, then who exactly makes the decision on the strait? Who has the authority? Who has the communication lines still intact to issue the order? A decapitated military does not make clean, rational decisions. It makes desperate ones. An Iran that is facing an existential threat, with its leadership potentially eliminated, does not necessarily make rational economic calculations, and that is the variable no analyst can fully price in. Even a partial disruption, mines in shipping lanes, attacks on tankers, harassment of vessels, would send energy prices spiking across the globe. It would hit European gas prices hard. It would raise manufacturing costs in China, Japan, South Korea. It would feed inflation in the United States at the worst possible moment. And it would potentially reshape the global economic order faster than any trade war or tariff regime ever could. This is the economic time bomb sitting underneath everything happening in the Gulf right now. Let's map out what this means for the rest of the world, not just the Middle East, the whole world, starting with oil and energy. The moment markets open on Monday, oil prices will spike. The question is by how much and for how long. If the conflict stays limited, a few days of strikes, a ceasefire negotiated, prices will spike and then fall back, similar to what happened in June 2025. If the conflict extends, if Iran's retaliation escalates, if the Strait of Hormuz is disrupted even partially, you are looking at oil above $100 a barrel potentially within days. That means higher gas prices for Americans, higher energy costs for European households already struggling with inflation, higher manufacturing costs for Asian economies, a global inflationary shock. China. Beijing has been quietly watching this for months. China imports roughly 40 to 45% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Any disruption to that flow hits the Chinese economy directly. China has significant financial and energy interests in Iran. It also has a relationship with the United States that is already deeply strained. How Beijing responds diplomatically to this attack, whether it condemns it, whether it provides Iran with diplomatic cover, whether it uses it as leverage in its own negotiations with Washington, will matter enormously for the next phase of U.S.-China relations. Russia. Moscow's reaction is already clear in tone. Medvedev's statement accusing the U.S. of showing its true face is early signaling. Russia and Iran have a complex partnership that deepened during the Ukraine war, with Iran supplying drones to Russian forces. A weakened or destabilized Iran is not in Russia's strategic interest, but Russia is also fighting its own war and has limited capacity to intervene directly. What Russia can do is use this moment diplomatically, in the UN Security Council, in energy markets, in its relationship with China, to chip away further at American global leadership, Europe. European governments will face an immediate energy security crisis if Gulf oil flows are disrupted. Most European nations rely heavily on LNG imports from Qatar, which transit the Strait of Hormuz. Germany, France, Italy, Spain, all of whom have been rebuilding their energy security after the Russia-Ukraine war, now face a new threat to their supply chains. European leaders will call for de-escalation. They will likely be ignored by Washington, and they will scramble quietly to secure alternative supply arrangements, the Gulf states. This is the most immediate danger zone beyond Iran and Israel. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, all of them had publicly stated they would not allow their territory to be used as a launch pad for strikes on Iran. All of them are now being targeted by Iranian missiles anyway. They are caught between their American security guarantees and their geographic reality. They share a neighborhood within Iran that is now at war, and their infrastructure, their economies, their populations are all within range of Iranian missiles and drones. The decisions made by Gulf leaders in the next 24 to 48 hours will define the region for years. The nuclear question. This is perhaps the most significant long-term consequence of all. The stated objective of today's strikes, as described by both Trump and Netanyahu, is to eliminate Iran's nuclear program, to prevent Iran from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon. But military strikes on nuclear facilities do not eliminate nuclear knowledge. They delay it. Every previous estimate from US and Israeli intelligence suggested that even a successful military strike on Iran's nuclear infrastructure would set the program back by 1 to 3 years, not permanently. If Iran survives this conflict, and it likely will in some form, the lesson it draws may be exactly the opposite of what Washington intends. The lesson may be, the only thing that would have prevented this attack is if we had already had the bomb. North Korea drew that lesson. Iran may draw it too. The regime change question. Trump and Netanyahu both explicitly called on Iranians to take over their government. They framed this not just as a military operation, but as a political intervention, an attempt to trigger regime change from within, using the existing protest movement as the internal pressure and the strikes as the external shock. This is an extraordinarily ambitious and historically fraught gamble. There are genuine protests in Iran. There is genuine economic desperation, but Iranian nationalism runs deep. Foreign military attacks have historically united Iranians, including opponents of the regime, against the outside aggressor. The 1980 Iraqi invasion of Iran, backed by Western powers, galvanized the Islamic Republic and extended its life by decades. This historical pattern is something both Trump and Netanyahu appear to be betting against. Whether that bet pays off is the central political question of the next several months. As of this recording, several critical things remain unknown, and the answers to these questions will determine whether this is the opening chapter of a short, contained conflict, or something far larger. Is Khamenei alive? Israeli reports suggest they may have struck close to his location. The regime moved him before the strikes, but the carefully worded language from Israeli sources, it is not clear that Khamenei did not undergo a dramatic event, is the most ominous sentence in the coverage so far. If the supreme leader of Iran is dead or incapacitated, the chain of command fragments at the worst possible moment. Succession in Iran is not a simple process, and a power struggle at the top of an already retaliating military force is deeply unpredictable. How far will Iran's retaliation go? Iran has already struck 4 countries hosting U.S. bases. It has fired missiles at Israel. It has cut its own internet. These are not the actions of a regime planning to de-escalate. CNN analysts noted this morning that Iran appears to be going fast and aggressively, possibly because they know the US and Israel targeted their missile stockpiles in the June 2025 war, and they are trying to use their remaining arsenal before it is destroyed. That interpretation, if correct, suggests the retaliation could be intense but time-limited. If they run low on missiles, they stop. But it also suggests the next 24 to 48 hours could be the most dangerous period. Will any other actor enter the conflict? Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, one of whose bases was already struck this morning. These are Iran's proxies. They have acted before in defense of Iranian interests. Whether they launch coordinated attacks on Israel's northern border, on American forces in Iraq and Syria, on shipping in the Red Sea, that is the question that determines whether this becomes a full regional war. What does China do? Beijing's official response will come in the next hours. If China moves to protect Iran diplomatically, blocking UN Security Council action, providing intelligence support, accelerating arms deliveries, the geopolitical fault lines of this conflict widen dramatically. If China stays on the sidelines, Iran is more isolated and the conflict may burn itself out faster. Here is where we stand as of this morning. The United States and Israel have launched the most significant military operation against Iran in history. Multiple Iranian cities have been struck. Tehran's presidential and leadership district has been hit. Iran's army commander and chief of staff are reportedly dead. Iran is retaliating against American bases across 5 countries. Oil markets are preparing for a shock. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil flows, is now a war zone. Whether this is the beginning of a short, sharp confrontation that produces a new geopolitical reality, or the opening of something far more sustained and dangerous, is a question that will be answered in the next 72 hours. What we know for certain is this: the Middle East you woke up knowing yesterday no longer exists. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think happens next? Does Iran close the strait? Does the regime fall? Does this spiral into something bigger? Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story is moving faster than any news cycle can keep up with, and we are going to stay on it every step of the way. This is the biggest story in the world right now, and it is just getting started.